I stood outside my childhood home at midnight, suitcase in hand, as my parents changed the locks behind me. My pregnant sister Emma watched from the upstairs window with a satisfied smirk. 22 years of being the reliable son, the one who helped pay bills, who sacrificed his college fund for family emergencies, and now they were literally throwing me out to convert my bedroom into a nursery. My mother wouldn't even look at me. My father mumbled about temporary arrangements, while Emma's husband, Brad, counted out $20 bills, like he was dismissing hired help. The fluorescent lights of the all-night diner buzzed overhead as I sat in a cracked vinyl booth nursing my third cup of coffee and trying to make sense of what had just happened. My name is Knox, and until 3 hours ago, I thought I understood my place in my family. I was wrong about everything. 3 weeks earlier, Emma had announced her pregnancy at our usual Sunday dinner. The moment those words left her mouth, I watched 22 years of family dynamics shift like tectonic plates. Mom started crying happy tears. Dad immediately began talking about converting spaces in the house. Emma glowed with attention, while her husband Brad nodded smugly, as if he had accomplished something remarkable by getting a 20-year-old pregnant after knowing her for 3 months. I'd been living at home while working 2 jobs, something that seemed practical and responsible. My morning shift at Patterson's Auto Parts started at 6 a.m., where I handled inventory and customer service. 3 days a week, I stayed late to do bookkeeping for Mr. Patterson and 2 other small business owners in town. The evening work paid well, and I was good with numbers. I had been steadily building my savings account, planning to move into my own apartment by spring. But every time I got close to having enough money saved, another family crisis would emerge. Dad's gambling debts from his weekly poker games would surface. Mom's medical bills from her diabetes management would pile up because she refused to take her medication consistently. Emma's credit card problems from her shopping addiction at the outlet mall would require family intervention. Somehow, my carefully saved money always became the solution to everyone else's poor choices. The pattern had been repeating for years, but I told myself I was being a good son. I was helping my family through temporary rough patches. I convinced myself that my sacrifice meant something, that my reliability was valued and appreciated. Looking back now, sitting in that diner booth with everything I owned, stuffed into 2 suitcases and a duffel bag, I could see how naive I had been. Emma had always gotten the bigger bedroom, the one with the walk-in closet and private bathroom. She got new clothes every season while I wore hand-me-downs from older cousins. When she wanted to go to homecoming or prom, the family car was available, and Dad paid for her dress. When I needed transportation to my after-school job at 16, I was told to ride my bike or figure something else out. Emma had dropped out of community college after 1 semester, claiming she needed to find herself. The family rallied around her decision, calling it brave and authentic. When I mentioned that I might want to take night classes at the same community college, Dad frowned and said, "This wasn't the time for me to be selfish during family struggles." Mom agreed, adding that my steady income was too important to risk on educational dreams. 3 months ago, Emma met Brad at a sports bar downtown. He was a construction worker with calloused hands and a quick temper. Within 2 weeks, he had moved into our house. Within a month, my parents were treating him like a son, while I got moved from my bedroom to an air mattress in the basement. The basement was cold, damp, and smelled like mildew. I developed a persistent cough from the moisture, but when I mentioned it, Mom said I was being dramatic. Brad had a criminal record that included assault and theft charges. When I privately expressed concern to Dad about this, he accused me of being jealous and judgmental. Brad was trying to turn his life around, Dad explained. Emma was happy, and that was what mattered. My comfort and safety were apparently negotiable. The night they kicked me out, Emma had been particularly cruel. She watched from the stairway as Mom and Dad explained that my presence was no longer compatible with their future plans. Emma needed space to prepare for motherhood. The basement wasn't suitable for a baby's crying to disturb everyone's sleep. I was 22 years old and needed to learn independence anyway. As they spoke, I noticed that my bedroom door was already painted a soft yellow color. Emma had been planning nursery decorations while I was at work, treating my living space like it already belonged to her. When I asked where they expected me to go with such short notice, Brad handed me $400 in $20 bills and said it should cover a motel for a couple weeks until I figured things out. I sat in my car after leaving the diner, scrolling through my phone to see if I had missed any signs of what was coming. That was when I discovered Emma's social media posts from the past 2 weeks. She had been sharing photos of paint samples and baby furniture with captions like, "Finally getting rid of the family loser," and "Can't wait to have this space for someone who actually matters." Her friends had been commenting with laughing emojis and supportive messages about how she deserved better than living with a deadbeat brother. The posts were time-stamped from days when I had been working double shifts to help cover Mom's medical bills. While I was sacrificing my time and energy for the family, Emma was publicly celebrating my anticipated removal from their lives. She had even posted photos of nursery decorations arranged in what was still my bedroom, captioned with "New life, new room, new energy." The next morning, I called my parents from the motel room I had rented with Brad's dismissal money. The room smelled like cigarettes and industrial disinfectant, but it was all I could afford while figuring out my next steps. Mom answered the phone, but the moment she heard my voice, she hung up. When I called back, it went straight to voicemail. Dad agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near the highway, but when I arrived, he brought Emma and Brad along for what he called moral support. They sat across from me in a booth like a tribunal, Emma's hand protectively placed on her small bump, while Brad glared at me with unconcealed hostility. The conversation that followed revealed the depth of my family's calculated manipulation. They had been planning my removal for months, ever since Emma announced her pregnancy. Nothing about their decision was impulsive or temporary. They never intended for me to save enough money to move out on my own timeline, because my financial contribution was too valuable to lose before they were ready. Dad explained their reasoning with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. Emma needed stability during her pregnancy. The house had limited space. I was old enough to handle independence. My job provided steady income, but I could contribute that income just as easily from my own apartment as from their basement. In fact, they expected me to continue helping with family expenses even while paying my own rent. But the truly devastating revelations came when Emma smiled and began sharing details they had kept hidden from me for years. They had been intercepting my mail, including job offers and college acceptance notifications. 8 months ago, Henderson Construction had offered me a supervisor position with full benefits and a significant pay increase. When I never responded to their calls, they assumed I wasn't interested. My parents had answered those calls, politely declining on my behalf. Community college had accepted me for their evening engineering program with a partial scholarship based on my high school grades and work experience. The acceptance letter never reached me. When the college called to confirm my enrollment, Dad told them I had decided to focus on full-time work instead. The scholarship was awarded to another student. Emma giggled as she revealed more intercepted opportunities. A local bank had wanted to interview me for a teller position with advancement potential. A technical school had offered me free training in automotive repair with job placement assistance. Dad had systematically sabotaged every chance I had for growth or advancement, ensuring I remained trapped in my current situation. Brad, who had been quiet during most of this explanation, suddenly became animated. He pulled out his phone and showed me photos of my converted bedroom. They had not only painted over the pale blue walls I had chosen for my high school graduation, they had also removed and painted over the small collage of achievement certificates I had hung near my desk. My high school graduation photo, honor roll certificates, and Employee of the Month awards from Patterson's Auto Parts had been completely erased. All of my belongings were stuffed into garbage bags and stacked in the garage between paint cans and lawn equipment. Emma announced that they planned to donate most of my clothes and books to charity unless I retrieved them by the end of the week. They had already chosen a name for the baby, Grace, after Mom. It was as if my 2 decades in that house had been completely erased to make room for this new life. The final revelation came when Brad pulled out a folder of tax documents. For the past 4 years, Dad had been claiming me as a dependent on his tax returns, while I filed as an independent. This meant he had been collecting my stimulus payments and tax credits without my knowledge. When I confronted him about this, he shrugged and said I lived in his house rent-free, so the money rightfully belonged to him anyway. But I hadn't lived rent-free. I had been contributing to household expenses for years, plus paying for my own food, gas, and personal items. Dad had been double-dipping, collecting government benefits designated for me, while also taking my direct financial contributions. Brad had helped him forge my signature on several documents, including forms that redirected my mail to a post office box I knew nothing about. As I sat there processing this information, Emma reached across the table and patted my hand with mock sympathy. She said I would thank them someday for forcing me to grow up and become independent. This was really a gift, she insisted. They were helping me become a real adult, instead of enabling my dependence on their support. When I pointed out that their interference had prevented me from becoming independent on my own terms, Brad leaned forward aggressively. He told me to stop making excuses and start taking responsibility for my life. If I had been truly capable and motivated, I would have succeeded despite any obstacles. The fact that I hadn't proved I needed this push. I left that coffee shop understanding that my family had never seen me as a person with my own dreams and potential. I was a resource to be managed, a source of income to be controlled, and now an inconvenience to be discarded. They had systematically sabotaged my attempts at growth, while convincing me that my sacrifice was noble and necessary. I drove across town to a neighborhood I had avoided for 2 years, following a route that led to my grandmother Rosalind's house. Dad's mother lived in a small but immaculately maintained craftsman-style home with a garden that bloomed year-round. I had always loved visiting Grandma Rosalind as a child, but family scheduling conflicts had made those visits increasingly rare as I got older. Standing on her front porch pressing the doorbell, I realized I hadn't seen my grandmother since my 20th birthday. Dad had always had reasons why visits weren't convenient. Emma had school events or medical appointments. Mom needed help with errands. Work schedules were too demanding. There was always something that prevented me from spending time with the one family member who had consistently shown interest in my thoughts and ambitions. When Rosalind opened the door, her sharp blue eyes immediately assessed my disheveled appearance and the suitcases in my car. At 84, she still moved with quick efficiency and spoke with the directness that came from running a successful antique business for 40 years. She pulled me inside, put a kettle on for tea, and demanded to know why I looked like a refugee. As I explained what had happened, Rosalind's expression shifted from concern to anger to something that looked like grim satisfaction. When I finished talking, she disappeared into her home office and returned with a box of letters and documents that made my stomach drop. She had been trying to contact me for months. Every letter had been returned as undeliverable, even though she had used the correct address. Every phone call to the house had resulted in Dad telling her I was too busy to talk, but that he would pass along her messages. Messages that never reached me. Rosalind showed me copies of birthday cards with checks inside Christmas gifts, with gift cards attached, and letters asking about my college plans and career goals. She had sent a substantial graduation gift when I finished high school that I never received. She had been setting aside money for my 21st birthday celebration that never happened because Dad told her I was working and couldn't make time for parties. But the financial revelations were even more shocking. Rosalind and my late grandfather Harold had established college funds for both Emma and me when we were born. The accounts had been growing for over 20 years, accumulating interest and investment returns that would have easily covered full tuition, room and board, and living expenses for 4-year degrees at excellent universities. Dad had been receiving quarterly statements on these accounts and had full legal access to the funds for educational purposes. Emma's college fund had been partially depleted when she enrolled in community college, even though she only attended for one semester. My account remained untouched because Dad had never informed the fund administrators that I wanted to pursue higher education. Rosalind spread financial documents across her kitchen table, showing me bank records and investment statements that revealed the scope of my family's deception. The grandparents had been subsidizing my parents' lifestyle for years, believing their contributions were helping to support Emma's education and my career development. Instead, Dad had been using the money to cover his gambling debts, while forcing me to work multiple jobs to pay for household expenses. Even more disturbing, Rosalind had been conducting background checks on Emma's boyfriends as a protective measure. She maintained subscriptions to several public records databases through her antique business, and she had been quietly investigating anyone who showed romantic interest in her granddaughter. Brad's background was worse than I had imagined. He had 2 previous arrests for domestic violence against former girlfriends. He had been married twice, but had never legally divorced his second wife, making his relationship with Emma potentially bigamous. He had outstanding warrants in 2 neighboring states for failure to appear in court on theft charges. His construction job was sporadic at best, and he had been fired from his last 3 positions for showing up intoxicated. Rosalind had been trying to warn my parents about Brad for months, but Dad had refused to listen. He accused her of being judgmental and interfering. Emma was an adult who could make her own choices about relationships. Brad was reforming himself through love and family support. My grandmother's concerns were based on prejudice against working-class men. But the most shocking revelation came when Rosalind showed me a copy of my grandfather Harold's will. Harold had been suspicious about Tom's treatment of me for years, particularly the obvious favoritism shown toward Emma. The will contained specific provisions that would restructure the inheritance if Tom ever demonstrated clear mistreatment or favoritism that harmed my development or opportunities. Rosalind had been quietly documenting everything for months. She had copies of the job offers that were declined without my knowledge. She had records of the college acceptance letters that never reached me. She had been tracking my work schedule and noting how my income was being diverted to cover family expenses that should have been managed by adults. Harold's will specified that if Tom violated the spirit of equal treatment between his children, the bulk of the inheritance, betrayal, would be redirected into educational and career development trusts that Tom could not access or control. Rosalind had been waiting for clear evidence of systematic abuse before triggering these provisions. But then she revealed something that made everything else pale in comparison. She reached into the document box and pulled out a manila envelope marked with my name in Harold's handwriting. Inside were photographs from my infancy and early childhood, along with a letter explaining Harold's growing suspicions about my parentage. Based on timing circumstances and my obvious physical differences from Tom, Harold had suspected for years that he might be my biological father. He had been a young soldier on leave when he met my mother, Grace, at a USO dance 3 months before she married Tom. Harold had been called back to active duty before he knew about the pregnancy, and Grace had married Tom believing he was the father. But Harold had noticed things over the years. My interest in mechanical systems and engineering problems traits that ran in Harold's family, but not in Tom's. My physical resemblance to Harold's side of the family, including eye color and bone structure that didn't match Tom or Emma. Most importantly, the way Tom treated me with consistent resentment that seemed to go beyond normal father-son conflict. Harold had never confronted Grace or Tom about his suspicions, but he had quietly arranged for enhanced inheritance protections in case his suspicions were correct. If I was indeed his biological son rather than his grandson, Harold wanted to ensure that Tom's resentment couldn't damage my future opportunities. Rosalind had been carrying this secret for 2 years since Harold's death, waiting for the right moment to pursue DNA testing and legal verification. She believed that learning the truth might hurt me, but watching Tom systematically sabotage my life had convinced her that I needed to know my real family history. That evening, sitting in Rosalind's spare bedroom, surrounded by documents that proved my entire life had been built on lies and manipulation, I made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and began typing a social media post that would expose the truth about my family situation. I started with the basic facts: 22 years old, kicked out of my family home to make room for my pregnant sister's nursery, given $400, and expected to disappear quietly. But then I began sharing the evidence that Rosalind had helped me compile. I photographed the garbage bags containing my belongings, stacked in the garage next to paint cans and lawn equipment. I scanned copies of the job offers that had been declined without my knowledge, including the construction supervisor position and the bank teller opportunity. I included screenshots of Emma's social media posts celebrating my removal from the family, particularly the ones calling me a loser and deadbeat. Most damaging, I shared documentation of the tax fraud. I photographed the forged signatures and the redirected stimulus payments along with bank records, showing how my income had been diverted to cover Dad's gambling debts. I included copies of the college acceptance letter I never received and the scholarship opportunity that was given to another student when I failed to respond. I wrote about the systematic sabotage of my opportunities, the interception of my mail, and the deliberate isolation from my grandmother, who had been trying to support my education and career development. I explained how my parents had convinced me that I was being a good son by sacrificing my future for their immediate comfort, while secretly ensuring that I could never become independent enough to threaten their financial control. The post was long and detailed, but I included enough photographic evidence to prove every claim. I ended by asking if anyone else had experienced this kind of family manipulation and whether people thought I was wrong to expose these private family matters publicly. I hit the publish button at 11:30 that night, expecting maybe a few supportive comments from high school friends who might still follow my social media accounts. Instead, the post exploded across multiple platforms within hours. My high school friends began sharing the post, immediately adding their own comments about how they had wondered why I suddenly became unavailable for social activities after graduation. They remembered invitations to parties and group outings that I had supposedly declined, even though they never received direct responses from me. Several friends mentioned job opportunities they had tried to share with me, only to be told by my family that I wasn't interested in changing positions. Former teachers began commenting when my high school guidance counselor shared the post. Mrs. Rodriguez remembered recommending me for several scholarship programs and college preparatory courses. She had been confused when I never followed up on any opportunities, especially since I had been such an engaged and ambitious student. She had assumed I had lost interest in education, but now realized that her communications had been intercepted. The local newspaper picked up the story when it reached 5,000 shares. A reporter contacted me through social media, asking if I would be willing to discuss family financial abuse as part of a larger investigation they were conducting into elder abuse and domestic financial crimes. I agreed to an interview which led to television coverage on the regional news stations. My story resonated with viewers who had experienced similar family manipulation. People shared their own accounts of parents who sabotaged job opportunities, siblings who received preferential treatment, and family members who used financial control to prevent independence. The comments section became a support group for adults who had escaped family systems that treated them as financial resources rather than individuals with their own rights and potential. But the attention also triggered Emma's attempt to control the narrative. She posted her own response, claiming that I was mentally unstable and had been exhibiting concerning behavior for months. According to her version of events, my parents had reluctantly asked me to leave because they were worried about my increasingly erratic and potentially dangerous conduct around her pregnancy. Emma's post backfired spectacularly. Brad's ex-wives found her social media accounts and began sharing their own stories about his history of domestic violence and financial fraud. They revealed that he was still legally married to his second wife, making his relationship with Emma potentially bigamous. They shared police reports documenting his arrests and court records showing his pattern of targeting young women with financial problems. Even worse for Emma, people began investigating her own social media history. Screenshots of her posts celebrating my removal from the family were shared thousands of times, contradicting her claims that the decision had been difficult and necessary for safety reasons. Her history of expensive shopping purchases and lavish social outings, funded while I was working double shifts to pay family bills, created a clear picture of someone who had been prioritized and protected while I was being exploited. The attention reached my workplace when a customer recognized me from the news coverage. Mr. Patterson, the owner of the auto parts store, was shocked to learn about the job opportunities I had supposedly declined. He revealed that he had been trying to promote me to assistant manager for 8 months, but someone claiming to be me had repeatedly called to say I wasn't interested in additional responsibility. Mr. Patterson had been confused by these phone calls because my work performance had been exemplary, and I had previously expressed interest in learning more about business management. He had assumed I was being modest or insecure about my qualifications, but now realized that someone had been deliberately sabotaging my career advancement. The story gained national attention when a social media influencer who specializes in family trauma shared my post with her 2 million followers. Suddenly, I was receiving interview requests from podcasts, websites, and television programs that wanted to explore the hidden epidemic of family financial abuse. But the most unexpected response came through a private message from someone claiming to be my half-brother. He had seen the story when it was shared in a military veteran support group, and something about my physical appearance and the mention of my grandfather Harold had triggered his own family memories. He said that Harold had once mentioned a grandson who got away during his military service, and he wanted to know if I might be interested in DNA testing to confirm a possible family connection. 3 days after my social media post went viral, Dad called me in a complete panic. His voice was shaking so badly I could hardly understand him at first. Rosalind had cut off all financial support to my parents and was threatening to restructure Harold's entire will based on the evidence of systematic abuse and fraud that had been documented and shared publicly. The family was facing immediate financial collapse. Without the quarterly subsidies from my grandparents' trust accounts, Mom and Dad couldn't cover their mortgage, car payments, or basic living expenses. Dad's gambling debts were much worse than anyone had realized. He owed money to several dangerous individuals who had been patient about repayment only because they knew about the family's wealth connections through Harold's estate. Dad begged me to help convince Rosalind to reconsider her decision. He promised to make things right, to pay back the stolen stimulus money, to help me find my own apartment with a security deposit. He claimed that everything had been a misunderstanding, that they had been trying to help me become independent but had made mistakes in their approach. I listened to his desperate explanations while sitting in my grandmother's living room, surrounded by legal documents that proved every word was a calculated lie. Rosalind sat beside me taking notes and occasionally rolling her eyes at Dad's creative rewriting of recent events. The real crisis became clear when Grace developed chest pains that evening and ended up in the emergency room. Her diabetes management had been poor for months, complicated by stress, and her refusal to take prescribed medications consistently. But the immediate trigger was the phone calls from creditors who had suddenly become aggressive about collecting debts that had previously been manageable through family wealth. Mom's hospitalization revealed the scope of their financial problems. They had been living beyond their means for years, accumulating credit card debt and borrowing against the house equity while relying on Harold's trust distributions to cover the shortfalls. Without that safety net, they were facing bankruptcy within weeks. Emma's situation became even more complicated when Brad's second wife showed up at the house with police officers demanding to know why her legal husband was living with another woman and planning to have a baby. The bigamy allegations triggered a criminal investigation that could result in serious charges for Brad and potential legal complications for Emma regarding her pregnancy and any government benefits she might be receiving as his wife. The stress of these revelations sent Emma into premature labor at 34 weeks. She was hospitalized for monitoring and bed rest, facing potential complications that could affect both her health and the baby's development. Brad disappeared rather than deal with the legal consequences of his marriage situation, leaving Emma completely alone and facing criminal charges for knowingly participating in a bigamous relationship. While my family was falling apart, my own situation was rapidly improving in ways that seemed almost miraculous. The regional auto parts chain that had seen my story offered me a position as a training coordinator for their entire Southeast division. The job included a signing bonus of $10,000, full health benefits, and educational assistance for completing my degree. More importantly, Rosalind had arranged for DNA testing that confirmed Harold was indeed my biological father. This revelation restructured my entire understanding of family relationships and legal inheritance rights. As Harold's biological son rather than adopted grandson, I was entitled to a substantially larger portion of his estate than anyone had realized. The half-brother, who had contacted me through social media, drove down from North Carolina to meet me in person. David was 38 years old, a successful mechanical engineer who had built a consulting business specializing in automotive systems design. He had grown up knowing that Harold was his father, but had never known about me until he saw the viral social media post and recognized the family resemblance. David confirmed the DNA connection through his own family documentation and offered me a position at his engineering firm with full training and mentorship. He had been looking for someone with my combination of practical automotive experience and analytical skills. The fact that we were brothers made the opportunity even more meaningful for both of us. But the most shocking revelation came when Rosalind opened Harold's safety deposit box and found detailed documentation of what she called Harold's insurance policy against family manipulation. Harold had suspected Tom's resentment and favoritism for years, and he had been quietly building legal protections for my future. Harold had established a separate trust account that Tom and Grace knew nothing about, funded through his military benefits and investment returns over 20 years. The account had been growing steadily since my birth, accumulating enough money to cover full university education, graduate school if I chose, and seed capital for starting a business or buying a home. Even more impressive, Harold had been documenting Tom's behavior through private investigators and legal consultants. He had evidence of the gambling debts, the intercepted mail, and the systematic sabotage of my opportunities going back to high school. Harold had been building a legal case for removing Tom as executor of family financial matters and transferring those responsibilities to Rosalind. Rosalind showed me Harold's detailed letter explaining his strategy. He had loved Grace enough to avoid disrupting her marriage by revealing my true parentage, but he had refused to let Tom's resentment destroy my potential. The trust account, the legal documentation, and the inheritance protections were Harold's way of ensuring that I would eventually have the resources and support necessary to build the life I deserved. Harold's letter specifically addressed the possibility that Tom's behavior would escalate to the point of forcing me out of the house before I was financially prepared. If that happened, Harold had arranged for emergency funds and legal support to help me establish independence immediately, rather than struggling to escape family control gradually. The letter ended with Harold's personal message to me. He explained that discovering he was my father had been the greatest gift of his later life, even though he couldn't acknowledge that relationship publicly. He had watched me grow into someone with intelligence, integrity, and determination that reminded him of his own youth. He wanted me to know that regardless of Tom's treatment, I had always been deeply loved and valued by someone who understood my potential. I used Harold's emergency fund and my new job's signing bonus to secure a furnished 2-bedroom apartment in a modern complex near David's engineering firm. For the first time in my adult life, I had my own space, my own kitchen, and nobody questioning my choices or demanding explanations for my activities. The apartment felt like stepping into a different universe. I could eat what I wanted, sleep when I was tired, and pursue interests that had been discouraged or mocked at home. I bought books about engineering and business management. I enrolled in online courses to prepare for completing my degree. I learned how to cook actual meals instead of surviving on whatever was cheapest and most convenient. But the legal consequences for my family were just beginning. The IRS investigation into the forged tax documents and stolen stimulus payments resulted in federal charges against Tom for identity theft and tax fraud. The potential penalties included substantial fines, restitution requirements, and up to 5 years in prison depending on the total amount of money involved. Grace faced charges for enabling the tax fraud and for intercepting federal mail addressed to me. The mail interception was particularly serious because it included government documents, college correspondence, and financial notifications that had affected my credit score and legal standing. Her medical problems complicated her legal situation, but prosecutors were unwilling to drop charges that involved systematic fraud over multiple years. Emma's marriage was legally annulled when Brad's bigamy was confirmed through court records. This left her as an unmarried mother facing potential fraud charges for accepting government benefits and tax credits based on a marriage that was never legally valid. She also faced civil liability for any debts that had been incurred jointly with Brad, even though he had disappeared and was unlikely to contribute to repayment. Brad himself became the subject of a multi-state manhunt when his failure to appear for the bigamy charges triggered outstanding warrants in 3 different jurisdictions. His pattern of targeting young women with financial problems had left a trail of legal complications that law enforcement was finally taking seriously. My new position at the auto parts chain came with legal insurance benefits that covered my pursuit of restitution and civil damages. The company's legal department was particularly interested in my case because it demonstrated how family financial abuse could affect employee performance and career development. They wanted to use my experience to develop better support systems for workers who might be experiencing similar manipulation. The viral social media post had opened doors to speaking opportunities that I never could have imagined. Social workers and family counselors began inviting me to share my story at professional conferences and training sessions. I discovered that family financial abuse was much more common than most people realized. But it was rarely discussed openly because victims often felt ashamed or responsible for their situations. Working with legal advocates and social service organizations, I began helping other young adults escape similar family dynamics. Many of them had experienced the same pattern of sabotaged job opportunities, intercepted communications, and financial control disguised as family support. My story gave them language to describe their experiences and legal frameworks to pursue their own independence. Rosalind became my strongest ally and advocate, using her business connections and legal expertise to help me navigate the complex process of establishing my new life. She introduced me to accountants who helped me understand tax planning and investment strategies. She connected me with real estate professionals who explained the process of building credit and eventually buying property. Most importantly, Rosalind helped me understand that Harold's love and support had been real, even though it had been hidden and delayed. She shared stories about Harold's pride in my accomplishments, his frustration with Tom's treatment of me, and his determination to ensure that I would eventually have the resources to succeed on my own terms. David's mentorship accelerated my career development in ways that validated Harold's faith in my potential. Within 3 months, I was designing training programs for automotive technicians across the Southeast region. My combination of hands-on experience and analytical skills made me uniquely qualified to translate complex technical information into practical learning modules. The work was challenging and rewarding in ways that my previous jobs had never been. Instead of being told to limit my ambitions and focus on immediate financial contributions, I was encouraged to think creatively and develop innovative solutions to industry problems. David pushed me to consider graduate school and eventually starting my own consulting business, But the most significant revelation came when Rosalind showed me Harold's final surprise. Hidden in his safety deposit box was a letter addressed to me to be opened when I turned 25. The letter revealed Harold's detailed vision for my future, including specific suggestions for education, career development, and personal growth. Harold had researched engineering programs at several universities and had identified scholarship opportunities that would cover full tuition and living expenses. He had networked with professionals in automotive design and manufacturing to create internship possibilities and job placement assistance. He had even located potential business partners for the consulting firm he believed I should eventually establish. The letter included a separate trust fund that I had known nothing about worth enough money to cover graduate school professional training and initial business capital. Harold had been building this fund for over 20 years, reinvesting the returns and adding regular contributions from his military pension and Social Security payments. But beyond the financial support, Harold's letter revealed his deep understanding of my character and potential. He had recognized qualities in me that had been dismissed or discouraged by Tom and Grace. He had seen leadership abilities, creative problem-solving skills, and interpersonal strengths that could be developed into a successful and fulfilling career. Harold's final message was simple but powerful. He wrote that family wasn't about blood connections or legal obligations, but about people who genuinely supported each other's growth and happiness. Tom and Grace had failed as parents, not because they were bad people, but because they had prioritized their immediate comfort over their children's long-term development. Harold wanted me to understand that I had always been worthy of love, support, and encouragement. The fact that Tom had resented me was a reflection of his own insecurities and limitations, not a measure of my value or potential. Harold's love had been consistent and unwavering, even when it couldn't be expressed directly. 6 months after being thrown out of my childhood home, I was sitting in my own apartment on a Saturday morning drinking coffee and reviewing applications for the scholarship program I had established using Harold's private trust fund. My life had transformed so completely that looking back felt like remembering someone else's experiences. My career was thriving beyond anything I had imagined possible. The automotive industry training programs I had developed were being implemented across 12 states, and I was receiving offers from major manufacturers to design specialized education modules for their technician certification programs. David had promoted me to senior consultant and was helping me plan my own independent business for when I completed my engineering degree. The degree itself was progressing smoothly through evening and online classes, fully funded by company educational benefits and Harold's legacy account. I was maintaining a perfect GPA while working full-time, something that would have been impossible while managing family financial crises and emotional manipulation. Academic success felt natural when I wasn't constantly exhausted from workplace double shifts and family drama. But the legal resolution of my family's situation had been satisfying in ways that went beyond personal vindication. Tom had accepted a plea agreement that included 18 months in federal prison, 5 years of probation, and full restitution for the stolen stimulus payments, plus interest and penalties. His gambling debts had been resolved through bankruptcy proceedings that protected the house, but eliminated most other assets. Grace received 2 years of probation community service requirements and mandatory financial counseling. Her diabetes management improved dramatically once the stress of maintaining financial lies was eliminated. She had written me several letters of apology, acknowledging her role in enabling Tom's manipulation and expressing genuine remorse for the damage that had been caused to my opportunities and self-confidence. Emma's situation had been more complex because of her pregnancy and Brad's abandonment, but ultimately more positive than anyone had expected. The premature labor had been successfully managed, and she had delivered a healthy daughter at 36 weeks. Motherhood had forced Emma to confront the reality of her choices and develop independent skills that she had never needed while being protected and subsidized by family resources. Emma had found work at a retail management position, and was attending community college part-time to complete her degree in early childhood education. She had written me a detailed letter acknowledging her cruelty and selfishness, particularly the social media posts that had celebrated my removal from the family. She expressed gratitude that my story had exposed Brad's criminal history before their relationship could progress to marriage and potential violence. Most importantly, Emma had begun therapy to address the family dynamics that had taught her to compete with me for resources and attention rather than supporting each other's success. She was learning to parent her daughter without perpetuating the favoritism and manipulation that had damaged our sibling relationship. Brad had been arrested in Florida on multiple outstanding warrants and was facing several years in prison for fraud, domestic violence, and failure to appear charges across 3 states. His disappearance had been a blessing for Emma, who was able to focus on her own development without his negative influence and criminal complications. The scholarship program I had created was helping 12 young adults escape similar family financial abuse situations. Working with social workers and legal advocates, we had developed screening processes to identify genuine cases and support systems to help recipients establish independence successfully. The program covered emergency housing educational expenses and career development support for people aged 18 to 25. Each recipient's story reinforced my understanding that family financial abuse was a widespread problem that rarely received public attention. Parents who sabotaged their children's job opportunities, siblings who were favored at the expense of others' development, and extended families who enabled dysfunction rather than supporting growth were more common than most people realized. My speaking engagements had expanded to include conferences for social workers, legal professionals, and financial counselors who worked with families in crisis. My story had become a teaching tool for identifying and addressing family systems that prioritized control over genuine support. I had co-authored articles for professional journals about the long-term psychological and economic effects of family financial manipulation. But the most meaningful part of my new life was the relationship I had developed with Sarah, a social worker I had met during one of my speaking engagements. Sarah specialized in helping families develop healthy communication and financial management skills, and she understood the dynamics of manipulation and control that had shaped my early adulthood. Our relationship developed slowly and carefully, built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than dependency or convenience. Sarah helped me recognize and change thought patterns that had been shaped by years of emotional manipulation. I helped her understand how family financial abuse affected the people she worked with professionally. For the first time in my life, I experienced what it felt like to be genuinely supported and encouraged by someone who wanted me to succeed for my own benefit rather than theirs. Sarah celebrated my achievements without trying to claim credit or control. She supported my goals without demanding that I modify them to meet her needs. She loved me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. Rosalind had become the grandmother I had always needed, someone who offered wisdom and support without strings attached. She attended my graduation ceremonies, celebrated my professional achievements, and shared stories about Harold that helped me understand my family history and genetic heritage. She was teaching me about business ownership and investment strategies, preparing me for the financial independence that Harold had always envisioned for my future. David had become the brother I had always wanted, someone who shared my interests and values while encouraging my growth and development. Working together had strengthened our family connection while advancing both of our professional goals. We were planning to expand our consulting business to include other family members who shared our engineering interests and entrepreneurial ambitions. The story reached its final resolution when I visited Harold's grave with Rosalind on the anniversary of his death, bringing the letter he had written for my 25th birthday. Reading Harold's words while standing at his gravestone, I understood that being forced out of my childhood home had actually been my liberation from a family system that had been limiting my potential for years. Harold's letter emphasized that real family members support each other's success rather than sabotaging it, and that I had always possessed the intelligence, integrity, and determination necessary to build a meaningful life, regardless of the obstacles I had faced. Being thrown out of that house had forced me to discover my real capabilities and connect with people who genuinely cared about my welfare. The final paragraph of Harold's letter contained his most important message. He wrote that sometimes the greatest gift life can offer is being forced to leave a situation that has become comfortable but limiting. Growth requires challenge. Independence requires risk, and success requires the courage to pursue opportunities even when family members discourage or oppose those choices. I realized that my parents had actually given me exactly what I needed, even though their motivations had been selfish and cruel. By forcing me to leave their house, they had freed me to discover my real potential and build relationships with people who supported my growth rather than hindering it. I had learned the difference between genuine love and manipulative control, between family loyalty and enabling dysfunction. Standing at Harold's grave, reading his words of encouragement and wisdom, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. I had survived family betrayal, financial abuse, and systematic sabotage to build a life that exceeded anything I had been allowed to imagine while living under my parents' control. The greatest lesson I had learned was that blood relationships don't automatically create family bonds, and that real family consists of people who genuinely support each other's happiness and success. Harold had been my real father in every way that mattered, even though I had never known him in that role during his lifetime. Rosalind had been my real grandmother, even though our relationship had been deliberately limited by people who resented her influence on my development. My story had resonated with thousands of people because family financial abuse and emotional manipulation were far more common than most people realized or discussed openly. By sharing my experience, I had helped other people recognize their own situations and find the courage to pursue independence and authentic relationships. If you've experienced family dynamics that prioritize control over support, or if you've ever felt like your dreams were being discouraged or sabotaged by people who claim to love you, I want you to know that you deserve better. Real love encourages growth, celebrates success, and supports independence. You have the right to pursue opportunities that align with your values and interests, even if family members disapprove or feel threatened by your progress. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and personal growth? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help it reach other people who might need to hear this message. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about overcoming family challenges and building authentic relationships. And please share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting content that addresses real issues affecting families across America. I hope my experience can help you recognize your own worth and find the courage to pursue the life you deserve regardless of the obstacles or opposition you might face. Remember that your potential is not determined by other people's limitations, and that real family will always support your success rather than sabotaging your dreams.